For almost a decade, I believed my life was steady, safe, and unshakable. Mark and I had been married for 9 years, and on the surface, everything looked perfect. A comfortable home, financial security, and most of all, our daughter Sophie, whose smile made the world brighter. Yet somewhere along the way, routine dulled the edges of my happiness. What once felt comforting began to feel suffocating. I craved something more, a spark, a reminder that I was still young and alive. That's when Jenna came back into my life. Jenna had always been wild, the kind of friend who laughed aloud, drank too much, and lived like consequences didn't exist. When we reconnected over coffee, she said, "You've gone soft, Lisa. You used to be fun." I laughed, but her words clung to me like smoke. For the first time in years, I started to wonder if maybe she was right. It began small. A night out here, a few too many drinks there. I told Mark it was just girl time and he believed me because why wouldn't he? I was his wife, the mother of his child. But every night I spent with Jenna, I felt further away from that version of myself. I flirted, I danced, I started saying yes to things I used to avoid. And then came the night I crossed the line. It was a rooftop bar, loud music, city lights, laughter echoing off the glass. Jenna was already drunk, hanging on some guy's arm, daring me to stop being boring. A man with warm eyes and a reckless smile started buying me drinks. I should have said no. I should have walked away. But I didn't. That night, I made the worst mistake of my life. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen, pouring cereal for Sophie while Mark kissed my cheek and asked if I slept well. I smiled and nodded like I hadn't betrayed everything we'd built. I told myself it was one mistake, one night. I'd bury it deep and move on, but secrets have weight. Mark began noticing my distance. He asked questions I dodged. When he touched me, I flinched, and when he gently asked if something was wrong, I laughed. I told him he was being dramatic. I mocked his jealousy, even when his voice trembled with confusion. In that moment, I chose the lie, and I told myself it was love. Mark didn't push. He never raised his voice, never accused. But his silence became louder than any argument. He stopped asking where I'd been. He stopped waiting up. I think, in his own quiet way, he was preparing for the answer he already knew. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the bedroom, Mark walked in and placed his phone on the bed in front of me. He didn't say a word, just tapped the screen. Photos, messages, voice notes. My stomach dropped. Jenna had uploaded everything to the cloud, probably by accident, maybe for her own amusement. There I was, laughing, touching, kissing someone who wasn't my husband, and worst of all, mocking Mark's suspicions in a drunken voice note that ended with, "He'd never leave me. He's too safe." Mark stood there for a moment, watching me absorb the truth. Then he said, calmly, like he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times, "I know what you did. Lisa, we're done." He didn't wait for my excuses. He picked up a duffel bag and walked out. The next few days blurred. I called. I texted. I cried into my pillow and swore it meant nothing. But Mark was gone, staying with his brother, unreachable except through his lawyer. He froze the joint accounts, changed passwords, moved Sophie's school pickups to his schedule without a word. When I showed up at his brother's place uninvited, he didn't open the door. Instead, his brother handed me a manila envelope through the screen door. Divorce papers, custody request, evidence files. The efficiency cut deeper than rage ever could. I blamed Jenna. I told myself she ruined everything, that if she hadn't come back, none of this would have happened. I drove to her apartment, still half drunk from whatever bottle I'd opened that morning. When she answered, I launched into a tirade. She just stared at me blankly, then said, "Don't make your mess my fault," and shut the door. And just like that, I had no one. The rumors spread fast. Jenna, ever the survivor, spun a version of events where I was the desperate, reckless one clinging to youth. Friends stopped responding. Neighbors stared. Coworkers whispered. Mark filed for primary custody of Sophie and I didn't even fight it. I knew I couldn't win. I had built my whole identity on being the stable one. The wife, the mom, the woman with the Pinterest perfect life. And in one night, I burned it all down. The court granted me weekend visits with Sophie. Every other Saturday, I'd sit on the edge of the park bench, waiting to see that little girl run toward me like she used to. But she didn't. Not anymore. She walked slowly now, her hand gripping Mark's before he gently nudged her forward. Her hugs were short. Her eyes stayed down. At first, I tried to make things feel normal, brought her favorite snacks, asked about school, planned activities. But she was quiet, distant, like she didn't recognize me. And maybe she didn't. Not really. Not the me I had become. Once, I asked if she wanted to sleep over. She looked up and said, "Dad said maybe next time." Then went back to coloring without waiting for a response. That sentence broke something in me. I started therapy. At first, just to say I was doing the work, but eventually, I stopped pretending. I confessed it all to the therapist, and slowly to myself. The arrogance, the thrill-seeking, the gaslighting, the sheer cruelty of what I did to the man who loved me without conditions, and the child who deserved better. Months passed. I moved into a small apartment with peeling paint and thin walls. My job barely covered bills, and every glance in the mirror reminded me that the freedom I once wanted came at a price I could never afford. I saw Mark again at Sophie's school play. He looked good, solid, confident. He was with someone new, a woman with warm eyes who held Sophie's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. I waited until the end, then walked up to him in the parking lot. "I'm sorry," I said, "for everything." He looked at me for a long time. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said quietly. Then he walked away, and he meant it, not out of bitterness, but because he had truly moved on. His forgiveness wasn't mine to ask for, it belonged to Sophie. And even she wasn't ready. Now, I sit alone most evenings, listening to the echo of a laugh I don't recognize anymore. The same laugh I once used to brush off Mark's pain. The same one that made Sophie's eyes fill with confusion when she heard it coming from someone who used to be her mom. I'm not healed. I'm not forgiven. But I am trying to become a woman worthy of being Sophie's mother again, even if that day never comes.